Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss the content on dispute prevention and the negotiation of handling clauses. Section 4, Arbitration Clause. This section primarily focuses on understanding the meaning and characteristics of arbitration, the forms of arbitration, the role and forms of arbitration agreements, the arbitration procedure, and the arbitration clause in sales contracts. First, let's take a look at the meaning and characteristics of arbitration. Arbitration refers to a process where the buyer and the seller, before or after a dispute arises, enter into a written agreement to voluntarily submit the dispute to a mutually agreed upon third party for resolution. This method of adjudication aims to interpret the dispute, and the decision made is final and binding on both parties, who must comply with its terms. Through long-term practice, many countries, including China, have enacted legislation to establish arbitration as one of the legal mechanisms for resolving disputes. The characteristics of arbitration include 7 aspects: voluntariness, professionalism, flexibility, confidentiality, finality, economy, and independence. Next, let's look at the forms of arbitration. Globally, ad hoc arbitration and institutional arbitration are the 2 fundamental forms of arbitration. They complement each other and each plays a role in the resolution of disputes. Ad hoc arbitration, also known as special arbitration or voluntary arbitration, is a form of arbitration that is contrasted with institutional arbitration. The parties themselves form an ad hoc arbitral tribunal by agreement or involve a permanent arbitral institution, and the arbitral institution does not manage the procedural aspects. Instead, the parties agree upon an ad hoc procedure by mutual consent, or they may refer to a specific set of arbitration rules or authorize the arbitral tribunal to select its own procedure. This type of arbitration is known as ad hoc arbitration. Institutional arbitration, also known as permanent arbitration, refers to arbitration conducted by a permanent arbitral institution. These institutions have their own organizational charter, arbitration rules, administrative management systems, and roles of arbitrators for selection. Institutional arbitration requires an application to be made the permanent arbitration institution to agreed upon by both parties, and the arbitration is conducted in accordance with the arbitration rules of this institution or the arbitration rules chosen by the parties. Institutional arbitration is conducted by a permanent body that operates with stringent and practical arbitration rules, employs trustworthy and broadly specialized arbitrators, and has transparent arbitration fees. This form of arbitration offers necessary services and conveniences for the arbitration process, making it the most prevalent method of arbitration worldwide today. Next, let's examine the role and forms of an arbitration agreement. An arbitration agreement refers to the arbitration clause stipulated in a contract by the parties, or a written agreement reached through other means to submit disputes to arbitration. An arbitration agreement serves the following purposes. First, it binds the parties to resolve disputes exclusively through arbitration, precluding them from filing a lawsuit in court. Second, it excludes the jurisdiction of the court over the relevant case. Third, it grants the arbitration institution jurisdiction over the relevant dispute case. If one party submits the dispute to arbitration and the other party fails to appear and defend itself within the stipulated time frame, the arbitration institution has the authority to conduct a default hearing and render a default award. Arbitration agreements primarily come in 3 different forms, but they hold the same legal validity. First, arbitration clauses within contracts. Second, arbitration agreements. Third, arbitration agreements signed by both parties either before or after a dispute arises. By way of reference, where the parties merely agreed to submit relevant disputes to arbitration as described in the arbitration clauses of a convention, trading, or standard contract. These 3 types of arbitration agreements, despite their different forms, possess the same legal efficacy. Next, let's take a look at the arbitration procedure. The arbitration procedure refers to the various formalities that parties must complete when submitting a dispute that has arisen in accordance with no arbitration, the provisions of an arbitration agreement. The basic steps of the arbitration process include the following four. First, filling
arbitration application.
Second,
Appoint arbitrators.
third,
Case hearing.
the arbitral tribunal has two forms of adjudicating cases: documentary review or hearing. Fourth,
Issue an award.
the award marks the final step in the arbitration process. Once the award is made, the procedure for adjudicating the case thus comes to an end. Hence, this type of award is referred to as a final award. Finally, let's examine the arbitration clause in the sales contract. The provisions of the arbitration clause should be clear and reasonable, not overly simplistic. In international sales contracts for goods, the content of the arbitration clause typically includes the location of arbitration, the arbitral institution, the rules of arbitration, and the causes of arbitration, among other aspects. The location of arbitration. According to the interpretation of relevant national laws, the country where arbitration takes place often applies the arbitration laws of the country. Second, the arbitral institution. The arbitral institution refers to the organization that hears arbitration cases and renders awards. It is generally advisable to specify in the contract which arbitral institution will handle the arbitration. But it can also be agreed upon by both parties after a dispute arises. According to the setup of arbitration institutions, there are three types of bodies conducting arbitration internationally. First, permanent arbitration institutions. Second, ad hoc arbitration institutions. Third, specialized arbitration institutions affiliated within specific industries. Currently, many countries and some international organizations around the world have established permanent arbitration institutions dedicated to handling commercial disputes. Third, arbitration rules. Arbitration institutions generally have their own arbitration rules. In arbitration clauses, it is customary to specify which arbitration institutions' rules are to be adopted according to the general practice of international arbitration. The principle is to adopt the arbitration rules of the place where the arbitration is conducted. However, parties are also allowed the freedom to choose other arbitration rules. Fourth, arbitration costs. It is customary to clearly specify the burden of arbitration costs. In the arbitration clause, generally, it is stipulated that the losing party shall bear the arbitration costs. However, there are also provisions that allow the arbitral tribunal to decide at its discretion. Please complete the following homework tasks. Alright, that concludes today's lesson. See you in the next class.